The idiotic and insightful investigations of Detective Ebenezer Maisonette. Secrets of the Silent Witness. Written and read by Jamie A Marsh.
Larry here, responding to your letter. I think I have a good story that you might like to put in your book. It was late evening and I had to put to bed a relatively straightforward case of the Major Grocott suicide. P.C. Patterson was the first on the scene, and by the time I had arrived it was pretty conclusive that he had taken his own life. That is what we thought, but, of course, as always, Maisonette and Farley showed up to make a mess of things. Maisonette swung into the room on his own. "You didn't send for me, Larry," he said. "I don't think your skills are strictly necessary with this one, Maisonette." Now, let's not get too hasty." He attached his ridiculous tiny magnifying glasses to his spectacles and started looking around the room. "What are you looking for?" "So he shot himself?" "Yes, you can see." "With that pistol?" "Yes." I was getting a little frustrated with him. "I don't think so," he scoffed. "What did he think he was doing, waltzing into my crime scene and trying to tell me if I was wrong about something so open and shut as a suicide by pistol? The nerve of the man! I think he noticed the anger brewing inside me." "Let me explain my reasoning. You see, the gun used is a single-shot percussion pistol, not an easy trigger to press, especially for a man suffering from early arthritis." I went to retort back this far-fetched reasoning when Maisonette interrupted me. "Look here, a collection of ties already knotted. He has a shoehorn to help him put on his already tied shoes, and cutlery with large wooden handles to help him with his grip." "Conjecture!" I shouted. "None of this, it's irrefutable evidence to open this as a suspicious matter. I've had enough to hear with your constant pompous interference." I stood below the taller Maisonette in anger. He barely moved a muscle in his face in response. He had just looked down at me past his bushy moustache. "I have spoken to Mr. Yewtree, the neighbour across the hall, and he said he didn't hear anything," said Farley, entering the room. "He didn't seem too upset about the whole thing, pleased even." We continued to stare at each other in confrontation. "Would you two like a room?" he asked with a chuckle. Maisonette broke the look and pushed past Farley to leave. "This twat of an inspector has decided to ignore my advice, so it seems our presence is no longer necessary," said he in frustration as he left the room. I felt as though I had won this argument, and so I lit a cigar to congratulate myself. Just as I was filing up the last of my paperwork on the whole matter, a young lady officer brought me a letter. It wasn't addressed to me specifically. It read, "Detective of Scotland Yard," but as I was the last detective to leave the station for the night, it had come to me. I opened it up to find the most unexpected news. It went as follows. "Dear Detective at Scotland Yard, I am writing to you to inform you of the most terrible matter that occurred this evening. I believe you think Major Grocott's death was a suicide, but I know it to be murder. I saw Mr. Yewtree enter his apartment before the police arrived. I cannot tell you much more, and I wish to stay unknown." I was mortified that I hadn't listened to Maisonette. I knew I was going to have to swallow my pride and bring this matter to him. That evening I arrested Mr. Yewtree in connection with the murder, but without further evidence he would walk. I waited till morning for a more respectable hour before heading to Tennant Street. There I found Farley and Maisonette in deep conversation over morning tea, regarding our great Queen Victoria. They were so immersed in discussion neither of them even noticed me in the doorway. "You must respect at least one woman," Farley asked in surprise. "Well, Farley, you see, my mother was a stern, frosty woman, so she had no time for me. I've never found myself so infatuated with the fairer sex as other men do, so that leaves me just the Queen, you understand." I coughed to get their attention. They both glanced over at me with a start. "Who let the twat in? Have you come to forgive me?" Maisonette announced. As brilliant and insightful as the man could be in helping with my job, he did know how to annoy me. I cut straight to the point. I handed Maisonette the letter. "What do you make of that?" I asked him. Maisonette sat staring at the letter I had given him. He sniffed the paper and examined it closely with his magnifying glasses, as he always had the habit of doing. "It was definitely a woman, I had no doubt of that." "How can you tell?" asked Farley. "The writing has a light elegance to it, not the strength of a man's hand. Furthermore, the paper has a distinctive aroma of perfume. Is there anything else that you can learn from this letter? I added. All the information he could inform me on of this case I knew would be of great help. Yes, plenty, he added. He handed me back the letter. I was confused. Was he going to tell me what they were? Clearly I displayed this confusion on my face, as he said, I want you to work them out for me. Larry, Farley said with a little too much surprise to be kind. It's straightforward. I'm sure we can work it out. I stared at the letter. I'd been looking at it all morning. What do you expect me to work out now? I got a little flustered and waved the letter in his face. What am I supposed to be looking at? It's a letter! My dear Inspector, let me give you a clue. What do you notice about the paper stock? Well, nothing. It's ordinary letter paper. Nothing special about it. Exactly, he exclaimed while standing up in excitement and snatching the letter back from me. Don't you see that means this can't come from a wealthy woman, or she would have used a more significant stationery? What you wouldn't know, though, yourself, is that this particular thickness and shade of white only comes from one shop in central London, found just off Leicester Square. Shall we go there then, Maisonette? Asked Farley. Maisonette coughed as he does. Detective Ebenezer Maisonette. You take Larry, Farley. I'll have a look again at the crime scene. You'll need this. He handed me back the letter. I set off with Farley in a cab to the little shop. Maisonette wasn't able to get his own cab, so I saw him walking away on foot. The conversation between myself and Farley was minimal. Our common interests were lacking. I don't believe he follows the horses like myself. Lovely weather in London today, said I. Farley nodded politely. We arrived at the small stationery shop to find the owner stocking up the exact paper we were there to ask him about. He was a small man with tufts of ginger hair on the sides of his head. He spoke in a timid tone that I could barely decipher, but a timid man I could always crack into answers. Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you? Said he. Detective Inspector Larry, I have recently received a curious letter and we believe the paper would come from this very shop. Can you confirm? He took the letter from me and put his spectacles on the end of his pointy nose. Yes, I would think so. Do you have a record of the purchase receipts? Asked Farley. The man stepped away from us and shouted, Mary! Then we heard the loud, heavy footsteps of someone coming down the stairs. The shop felt like it was shaking as she approached. A tall, muscular woman appeared in the doorway. Farley gulped. What do you want? She asked in quite a deep voice for a woman. Do you have the record books, love? The timid man asked. She reached up to a high shelf that only she could reach and pulled down a large book. It was tattered and used. The spine was hanging off the edge. Farley and I approached the counter to see. Mary coughed unexpectedly and put out her hand. She drew a hard bargain, so I gave Farley a look to oblige. He rolled his eyes and handed over a shilling. Mary opened the book. What do you want to know? She asked. Could we see the list of people who bought this paper in the last few days? Said Farley. She turned the page and spun the book with a hearty chuckle. It was a long list. How could we make anything out of that? Farley focused on all the names. I could see him thinking quickly, and then suddenly Mary closed the heavy book on Farley's hand. He flinched back in pain. She coughed again with an outstretched hand. Farley sighed and gave her another shilling. What do you think? I asked. We just need to narrow it down. We know it was a lady. We know she didn't have a very large amount of money, so it would be a small order. Luckily, most people bought large quantities. Bang! The book closed on Larry's hands again. Will you stop doing that? He demanded while placing down a few shillings. Keep it open a little longer, would you? Mary nodded. What are the options? I asked. Mrs. Bradford, Miss Glenfield, Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Yewtree. Could we get those addresses? Mary grinned from ear to ear and slowly reached out her hands expectantly towards him. Farley threw back his head to let out a large sigh. No need, I interjected. If you remember, Mrs. Yewtree is the neighbour to the late Major. We then proceeded to knock on the door of Mrs. Yewtree and it crept open. Only slightly, so we could only see just inside. Is that you, Bertie? Said a shy voice from behind the door. No, madam, this is the police, said I. Oh, she said while opening the door a little further. She didn't look up at us. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Then we heard the familiar, arrogant tones of Maisonette from behind her. Don't worry, dear. They're with me. Show them in if you could. I was a little disappointed that he got here first. Maisonette was already sitting, drinking tea. He smiled at our entry. Thank you for finally joining us. We sat down and Mrs. Yewtree poured us a cup of tea. Mrs. Yewtree, please could you tell these fine gentlemen what you have informed me of just now? She nervously placed down her teacup. My husband and Major Grocott have been arguing quite a bit over the last few months, always disagreeing on matters of the building. Bertie didn't like the fact that Major Grocott could play his harmonica late into the night, and the Major wasn't fond of our puppy Spencer, but... She stopped when cleared her throat, making noises in the mornings. Farley patted the head of the dog, who had just wandered in and laid next to his chair. I noticed as Mrs. Yewtree fixed her hair, she had a bruise on her eye that she was hiding with her slanted hat. Maisonette rose from his chair and walked to the fireplace. He started studying the painting of a boat at sea that sat above. So you see, my husband just had enough, she continued. He is prone to angry outbursts. He stormed over there. I couldn't stop him and killed the Major with his own gun. I knew what he had done and just couldn't let him get away with it. What will happen to him? He will most certainly hang for this, if you are willing to testify against him, Maisonette asked. I will, she answered. There was another knock at the door. Let me, Maisonette said, leaving the room. But why did you want to stay unknown? I asked. Were you worried about your husband finding out about the letter? Farley added. Mrs. Yewtree nodded and cowered away into her armchair. Maisonette returned with a woman not too dissimilar in appearance to Mrs. Yewtree. This is her sister, Maisonette informed us. Her sister quickly sat next to her and gave an affectionate hug. Are you all right? She asked. Mrs. Yewtree continued to hug her sister, not wanting to let go. I just have one last request, if I may, Mrs. Yewtree. Maisonette pondered. She sat up attentively to listen. Could you tell me what type of ship this is in the painting? He pointed to the one that he was looking at above the fireplace. That's a bark. Suddenly, as she said the last words, Spencer jumped up from beside Farley and started making the most outrageous racket. He couldn't stop barking until Farley was able to calm him down. You have my deepest sympathies and my utmost respect. You are free now. I'm sure your sister will look after you. Good day. Maisonette tipped his hat to the lady and left without another word. Myself and Farley sat puzzled for just a moment and then followed. Back in the cab, I still couldn't figure out what had just happened. Maisonette explained it as this. By a stroke of genius, or maybe desperation, or even both, Mrs. Yewtree conjured up a plan. It can be assumed then that the Major and Mr. Yewtree must have already had a dislike for each other, but if she was able to manipulate that situation to her advantage, then her husband could be tried of murder and she would be free of him. She mentioned that the Major played the harmonica, but with arthritis, as we discovered recently, I'm sure that wouldn't have been possible for him to play. Furthermore, when I tricked her into saying the word bark, her dog responded to command instantly, as though trained. What about the letter? Why do that? I was still trying to process all the information that he was recalling to me. Well, I'm sure the one thing she didn't expect was for her husband to be clever enough to stage the whole murder as a suicide, and one that he very nearly got away with. She very quickly and dangerously wrote that letter to make sure the police arrested him. I take back my earlier statement I said to you, Farley. Maybe I can respect more than one woman, and one of them is very brave indeed.
Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to help bring Detective Ebenezer Maisonette's next on-screen adventure to life, please check out our GoFundMe for the upcoming short film featuring him. And if you want to explore even more of his world, the book version is now available on Kindle and Amazon. Thanks again for being with us. We can't wait to share more soon.